Hello and welcome to this module's presentation on resilience. For this presentation we'll be using Hoops and Kelly's book, Managing Change with Personal Resilience. This lecture will cover the definition of resilience and then 6 of the 21 keys mentioned in the book. I encourage you to read the entire book if the 6 chapters that you read interest you. It's a quick read as you discover just by reading a few chapters. Also, TED Talks from Angela Duckworth and Carol Dweck are included in the module. They are also based on books written by the two women. These videos are optional, but I just thought I'd include them because I think it ties in very well to the topic of resilience from a teaching coaching perspective. Lastly, I'd like to point out that resilience is about dealing with change. I have presented this before, and what has come out of those presentations and discussion is that often we confuse change and conflict. Obviously, conflict can lead to change, and change can lead to conflict, but keep in mind throughout this lecture that we are talking specifically about how individuals interact with change. So why are we talking about resilience? It isn't necessarily a leadership theory, but I think one could argue it is becoming more and more important quality for leaders to possess. And so I ask you, how many of you had 2 days in a row that have been exactly the same? I doubt anyone has. Or how many of you had a day that you thought was going to look one way and then took a completely different turn? Failure is also a very powerful thing, and even more powerful, I think, is how we respond to it. Because you've heard the saying, it's not about what happens, it's about how you respond to what happens that matters most. So what is resilience? Hoops and Kelly define it as the ability to bounce back from setbacks and keep going toward your goal even more effectively than before. And I'd just like to point out the emphasis on the word more here. Resilience isn't just about responding to change, but responding in a way that enhances the individual and the situation. So the first 3 keys, I've decided that we're going to talk about these because they're pretty important and I think they lay a nice foundation for resilience. A movie clip that I like to use is from a Rocky film when Rocky is talking with his son about what life is about. I encourage you to look it up. You can just go to YouTube and search Rocky and Son speech or Rocky and Son inspirational speech. It's not required, but I just thought I'd throw it in there because if you want to be a coach, if you're going to work with coaches, a lot of the coaches I know are constantly looking for motivation and applicable clips from pop culture for their athletes, anything to relate the concepts they're trying to teach to their athletes. So the first 3 keys are: number 1, recognizing that change is here to stay; 2, understanding that loss of control is at the heart of change; and 3, understand the importance of resilience and adapting to change. So let's get into each of these a little bit more. Key number 1. You know the old saying, there are 2 things you can count on, death and taxes. Well, I think Hoops and Kelly would add change to that and say there's 3 things you can really count on. Change is inevitable, and we are inherently wired to either fight the change or flee the change. What resilience says is that people who can go with the flow and find a third way to deal with change tend to have a little more resilience. People who can live in the tension of the change and respond to it effectively are those who exhibit resilience. So please do not confuse going with the flow with being passive or lacking individuality. The analogy that they give in the book is about being in a kayak in a river, and the river representing change and the kayak representing the individual. I believe they say that in a moment of change, or a go with the flow moment, would be when your head is underwater and you have to quickly adjust and get back to where you were in a quick and safe fashion. Key number 2, understand that loss of control is at the heart of change. So control, comfort, and change, oh my. Change disrupts expectations, which results in a loss of control and discomfort. So the best way I can think of to explain this and to get away from the kayak analogy is to think about resilience and think about adaptation from a bucket standpoint. So we're going to use a bucket analogy. Your adaptation budget is what's in your budget at any given point, and recognizing that there's probably a lot of movement going on. So there's with your adaptation budget, there's things coming into your bucket and there's things going out. thought this was a good quote that kind of summarizes the budget, is that each change that you encounter or initiate will cost you a certain number of points. I threw in resources based on how much it disrupts your expectations. When you run out, your ability to adapt is limited. So it's important to have an idea of what's in your bucket all the time. Your adaptation capacity is the actual size of your bucket. So here's a story about my friend Lisa. I was talking to Lisa recently about resilience. It's kind of a hot topic for me right now in my real job of dealing with Girls Place Girls and helping kids to bounce back a little bit faster. But my friend Lisa was telling me the story about a life change she recently experienced. She moved to a new city and started a new job, neither of which was part of her expectations for her life. A year ago, she thought that she was going to continue living in her current city and retire in her current job. And when talking with Lisa, she explained to me that if the opportunity to move and start a new career would have presented itself 5 years ago, she didn't feel like she would have been equipped to handle such a change because she did not have as many resources to cope with the change. She said that she was able to meet this change head on a year ago because her resources had grown. So what we're seeing with Lisa is that she had a greater adaptation budget, which increased the size of her bucket from 5 years ago to 1 year ago. So hopefully that helps you get the idea of adaptation budget and capacity a little bit better. Key number 3, understand the importance of resilience in adapting to change. So to continue with the bucket analogy, resilience would then be the rate at which you can refill your bucket. As change occurs, expectations change, control decreases, and discomfort increases. Being resilient means you're equipped to recognize change is happening and can right yourself utilizing your resources to refill your bucket. So how quickly can you refill your bucket is an indicator of your resilience. How do you right yourself? Maybe think of some examples in your life. Maybe think of other people in your life that you consider to be resilient and see if there are any similarities in how you refill your buckets. So to review, your adaptation budget is what is in your bucket at any point, and it's probably in constant motion. Things going in, things coming in, going out. Your adaptation capacity is the size of your bucket. Resilience is your ability to refill your bucket, which requires you to acknowledge that change is happening and then you engage the contents of your bucket. So hopefully the bucket analogy helps paint a little bit better picture. Moving on to the other 3 keys that we're highlighting in this course. Key number 6, expect the unexpected so that you're rarely surprised. Key number 8, know your orientation to change, danger, or opportunity. And key number 9, understand the key elements of resilience. So key number 6, a friend of mine once told me that you should have no expectations at all because expectations only lead to disappointment. And then another friend of mine lives by the motto that your only limitation is the expectation that you have for yourself. So they clearly have different views on the role of expectation in life. When it comes to resilience, Hoops and Kelly see it both ways. Inaccurate expectations can lead to a loss of control, but no expectations at all means you perhaps have no control in the first place. So their advice is to expect the unexpected. Have expectations, with one of them being, there's going to be a surprise, and I'm ready for it. They consider this strategy to be an X factor when it comes to resilience. Key number 8 is that you have to know what side of the change table you're seated on. Are you on the danger side or the opportunity side? How do you look at change? So when faced with change, D's see risk and danger. O's see possibilities and opportunities. So something to reflect on, there's a spectrum right here on this slide, is where would you put yourself on this spectrum? And what is it about your personal history with change that makes you mark that spot exactly? I encourage you to spend a little time thinking about that. And key number 9, this is the heart of it. This is the meat of resilience, the 7 facets of resilience. There was a brief assessment in the book in this chapter. If you want to evaluate yourself, you can somewhat. There are more intricate assessments out there that have a little more depth and feedback if you want to look into it. But the 7 facets of resilience are key number 9. And what I like about these, and it's kind of similar to authentic leadership, is I believe they're very straightforward And there are things and there are elements that people can quickly identify with and assess within themselves. So positive, there's two versions of positive. Is, how are you viewing the world? How are you viewing yourself? Focus, do you have a clear vision to guide you and to ground you? Flexible social and flexible thinking. Do you have an array of external resources? Do you have internal resources? Organized. Is there structure and strategy to your approach to change? And then proactive. Are you on your heels or are you a go-getter? The great thing about change, too, is that it's not defined by a single trait, but rather relies on individuals to pull from the 7 facets depending on the situation. So at any given moment, you might be relying heavily more on your focused facet than you are in your proactive facet. And lastly, usually when I give talks, I like to include an activity. So here's a resilience activity for you. This idea of Say It in 6 is pretty fascinating, and the write-up on the left kind of gives you an introduction about it. If you want to look up more, there are kind of some sources there for you. I put the source on the right side. But what I'd like for you to do, and it's up to you if you do it or not, obviously, but I'm just kind of leaving you with this, is can you write your change autobiography in 6 words? Or can you write your resilience motto in 6 words? I put some time into mine, and this is what I came up with. Without change, I would not grow. I hope you take some time and that you enjoyed reading about resilience and you really think long and hard about how it applies to your life individually, but then also how it applies to coaches and teams and what that can look like in a season.